And we are recording. Steve, welcome everyone to the first edition of the All Surface Show, episode number 1, a few months in the making. I fear we talked about doing this at our Wimbledon show, and we didn't do it at all during Wimbledon or the US Open, the two of the biggest majors of the year. But we're here. We're doing it. Steve, welcome in.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it has been a little while coming, but glad to obviously, chat a little bit about tennis going into the back end of the season. The Grand Slams are done, but there's still plenty of tennis to be played this year. So looking forward to chatting all things tennis.
And plenty of tennis to talk about. So Steve and I, my name is David Berger, and I host Match Point number 9 of Tennis Bets podcast with my buddy John Reed. A lot of people know me from that. We don't do a ton of video on there. We need to make the leap into video, and we will on that show at some point. But also working with Steve here under our new banner, All Surface Media, we want to shift this into being one of our bigger shows, if not end up being our flagship show, where we hash things out in a more general sense, non-betting. And Steve runs Ace Previews. You can talk about that. But basically, we don't want to be bound to the betting lords. We want to opine in general about the sport. Would you agree with that sentiment, Steve?
Absolutely. I think, obviously a lot of the work, speaking for myself, a lot of the work I've done over the last, 10 plus years has been more so in that betting space. But the reason I got into talking about tennis in any way, shape or form is because I, genuinely love the sport. So it's the sport that kind of came first, and the betting came later, tied in with, liking talking about numbers and probabilities and those sort of things. But ever since I picked up a racket when I was, I think, 2 or 3, I've been a massive tennis fan, a massive tennis watcher. It's very easy to be a big tennis fan when you live in one of the towns where one of the 4 Grand Slams, is played every year. So yeah, looking forward to talking about, some of the more general aspects of tennis as well with yourself.
Yeah, and just have some more fun tennis content for the people. Seems like there's a real thirst for it. We love talking about it. We love being involved with it. And I've already flown out to Hangzhou, as you can see by my background. I'm ready for next week. I see you're somehow at a night match and at the AO, which is awesome. We're in the spirit, folks. We are in the spirit. And also bear with us. This is one of my first video recordings talking about tennis. I have done some for fantasy football in the past, but bear with me.
We'll be fine.
Yes. All right, Steve. The first thing I think we can talk about, we had a banner match, maybe not a banger, a U.S. Open men's final featuring the sport's 2 biggest stars, Jannik Sinner, Carlitos Alcaraz. It felt like early on it was Alcaraz, and then there was a brief moment of maybe Sinner's going to push back, but then I felt like it was pretty much over after Alcaraz gained control in the 3rd set. Here's what I want to say. One thing. This is a rivalry. Everyone's talking about it. It is undoubtedly a rivalry. That said, Steve, Alcaraz moves to 10-5 versus Sinner. And if it wasn't for the Wimbledon final, it would be 2 years since Jannik Sinner has beaten Carlitos Alcaraz. So I just think it's funny that it's a little bit one-sided, and I feel like that kind of goes under talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you look at, what Jannik Sinner's done, particularly over the last kind of 12 to 18 months, and you look at that head-to-head and you go, oh, like it feels like something's amiss there compared to, what we've seen, with Sinner versus basically everyone else on tour. It was, you mentioned about the final itself. It's it was a bit of a funny one. I feel like these two, to an extent, this year, um, they're probably the Roland Garros final probably put people's expectations even higher than they probably ever could before in terms of the not necessarily just the quality of the match, but the suspense and the Alcaraz coming back from triple match point down, and Sinner serving for the match, and then find themselves in a fifth set, and the ups and downs that came with that as well. So then it feels like then you get to Wimbledon, and then you get to the US Open, and you're almost expecting something similar from the pair, similar to that kind of run, years ago when you saw, oh well, we've got Rafa and Novak in a final, in a Grand Slam. Let me clear my schedule for the next 6 hours because this could go all night. And I think the Wimbledon and the US Open, the finals have maybe fallen flat, which it's been a bit unfortunate, I think, for the ATP Tour, because they've got these two stars who are so far and away above everyone else, and you almost then spend more than we have before. You spend a whole fortnight basically hyping yourself up for a final that's going to be a potential classic, and I'm not sure if the organisers would have been thrilled. I guess it was a four-setter, but it wasn't exactly filled with close calls, or close moments across the course of it. So, it's going to be fascinating to see how these two go, across the latter part of the year as they both kind of fight for world number one. But also Carlos going into the Australian Open. It's the Grand Slam he hasn't won, and it's the one that Sinner's had a little bit of a stranglehold on recently. So, interesting times, I think, over the next couple of months between the two.
For sure. Even though we didn't get a high level final in terms of the back and forth between the two, I do feel like you're encouraged by what you saw from the Spaniard over the US Open in terms of his level, which seems to be hitting new heights. How great he is, and I think we all think he can be even better. And I think we actually saw a little bit of a leap forward, especially in terms of his service game, cleaning up a lot of his errors as well, not dropping heinous sets to Demir Zoomer like in Cincinnati. And even I think he dropped one to him at the French Open randomly.
And I think what a really important thing I think was as well is that Alcaraz came out and said, after Wimbledon, they put in a training block basically dedicated to what do we need to do to be able to defeat Jannik Sinner. And yes, it was Carlos was one of many who skipped the start of the North American hardcourt swing, and it probably impacted, I guess, the quality potentially of those tournaments early days. But I think it certainly paid dividends for Carlos and the team, given how well he played from start to finish in New York.
Yeah, if this is going to be the true rivalry we want it to be, I think we want to see each person evolving, adding a notch in their belt in terms of their game as we move forward as a player. So we saw Alcaraz do that this time. We saw Sinner do it at Wimbledon. Now we'll see if Alcaraz can respond here at the Australian Open. I don't expect to see these guys. I mean, we talked about this on our Match Point 9 show, but it seems like they might play Shanghai, but I wouldn't be shocked if we don't see them till the ATP finals.
Yeah, they've both had. Well, they've both certainly had big seasons in different ways. Obviously, Sinner started incredibly well in January, but then had some time away. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if there's a real kind of true fight for the world number one over the next period of time, or if Jannik goes, well, I've got a pretty good chunk of points, early next year that I can make up from tournaments that I missed this year. So I think it's going to be an interesting look, I think, between the two of them, but they've certainly put a gap between themselves and number 3 in the world and the rest of the tour.
I would actually prefer Sinner just stay off the calendar and play more Australia ahead of the Australian Open, which he hasn't done in the last couple of years. Nice to get those bigger names in those run-up tournaments to the AO. And he had traditionally played them until the last 2 years. Obviously, they have a formula where he's won it back-to-back years, so I doubt they change anything. But it would be nice to get him in the mix in early January. You have a question here on our show sheet, which I think is actually pretty good to discuss. Are the two of them being the best in this signature rivalry, is it a blessing and a curse for the ATP? I mean, it's a blessing in terms of viewership. The men's championship on Sunday, according to ESPN, was up 82% versus the year before, which is sad for the American tennis fan base, because in 2024 you featured an American in the final. The women's championship also was up 50% from the year before. It was the most viewed final on the men's side in a decade, and ESPN's second most viewed on record. So that's great. The interest is high in tennis. On the flip side, as a non-casual, as someone who watches this a ton, it is a little like anticlimactic knowing how these big tournaments are more or less gonna wind up. And especially like in the back half of the second week of slams, it's just sort of rounding to the finish in a way.
And I think that's the thing. That's obviously it's great for the ratings, particularly when the two of them play each other. But you look at the singles race at the moment. We've got Carlos Alcaraz on just over 10,500 ranking points. Yannick Sinner's just under 8,000, and then in third place we have Novak Djokovic at 4,180. We're in this kind of weird spot. I feel like a couple of years ago, it felt like the game was calling out for who are going to be the players who take over from Federer, Nadal, and Novak. And Novak's done a tremendous job of being able to stay, at that top level. He's not going to be kind of, competitive in terms of a world number one, ranking, because he's just not playing enough tennis. He's been far more selective with what he does across the course of the year to be able to extend his career. But yeah, like years ago, we were wondering, is it Tsitsipas, is it Medvedev, who are going to be the next kind of 2, 3, 4 players? We had a whole next generation coming through that, we thought were going to kind of have control at the top of the game. And, although they didn't come on in the way that we thought they might, there was obviously, it brings a bit of intrigue, I guess, to that level. Whereas at the moment, it feels like, if I think Australian Open tickets go on sale next week, and I'm already trying to figure out, is it better to go on one of the second or third courts over the first or second week? Because I just don't know if I want to, pay what you need to do to get into some of these tournaments, to sit there and watch Yannick Sinner win 6-1, 6-1, 6-1 in, 78 minutes, whereas I could probably get a more enthralling contest on the second or third court for less money. And, I'm not going to be, twiddling my thumbs at 2:30 in the afternoon wondering what I'm going to do with the rest of the day, because the two matches have finished on the main court, because Sabalenka's won 6-1, 6-love, and Sinner's done, pretty similar. So I think while it's great for the final, and, what that can look like, given that that's the only place that they'll ever meet, being, ranked 1 and 2, it takes, for me as a viewer or someone wanting to attend, the first kind of week and a half of a Grand Slam, now you sit there and go, well, is it worth it sitting in the crowd to watch this, or should I be trying to get somewhere else?
Yeah, it's also pricing out people as well. We just tried to get Indian Wells stuff locked in. I mean, we're sitting here at the beginning part of September, and the prices are already, astronomical compared to even 2 years ago. And, that's for your Sinners, your Alcarazs, but, that's like one match. And like 90% of the people attending don't even know the rest of the players in the draw on the outer courts. So it's a bit unfortunate. It's a bit unfortunate from that aspect as well.
And it's it kind of reminds me, I think, of, I go back a number of years now, but I'm pretty sure there was that issue with tickets at Arthur Ashe Stadium when I think people were hoping for a Roger Federer versus Novak Djokovic final, and they ended up with a Marin Cilic versus Kai Nishikori final. And I think the value of the tickets and the resale certainly dropped. So there's appeal, I think, towards that back end, but there's no. It's my worry is the lead up and through that kind of first or second week. Why are you going to pay hundreds of dollars to watch something that you're 99.9% sure is going to be a fairly one-way traffic, particularly the first kind of 2 or 3 rounds before Sinner and Alcaraz can face a seed.
Yeah, and I was mainly talking the first weekend. Of course, opening day of Indian Wells, I'm sure, will be crickets and relatively easy to attend. That's why I went the opening day last year. It was great and able to move around. But that first weekend, it's blown out. It's like a Coachella or Stagecoach, the other signature events in that area. So, Steve, let's talk about the women's final. Sabalenka gets over the line at a major for the first time this year. Good on her. How are we feeling about? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, she finally beat an American this year in a final. It's it hadn't been going well through Madison Keys and Coco through 2 out of the 3, but it was nice to see her finally get over the line.
I guess where do we go from here? I think we still think Sabalenka, obviously, and Swiatek, top 2 players. Coco 3 will make it a tier, probably the top tier at the moment. Is Anna Samova inching her way back-to-back major finals? Is she inching her way into that tier? I obviously feel like she probably needs to take down a major to truly be in that tier. But are we expecting more of the same in 2026 from Anna Samova, or was this maybe a one-year wonder?
Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one to gauge, I think, with Amanda. So you look at it and you look at, well, first of all, I feel like it can get lost that she is still only 24 years old. So she burst onto the scene at such a young age, and obviously took an extended break from the game as well, which she is obviously, in some ways, I think it's obviously done her the world of good, because her level and consistency and what she's been able to do since she's come back has been terrific, and she's been able to make her way, as you said, she's up to sitting at world number 4 at the moment. In the back of my head, it's not necessarily wonder, but that's the curiosity, I guess, for me, is what could have happened for Anna Samova if the stars had aligned and things had changed a little bit. Just before she took her break, she had Darren Cahill in her coach's box, and things were clicking to an extent, but there obviously was other things going on behind the scenes, and that she wasn't getting that joy out of tennis that she had previously. But you just sit there and go, if something, if the order of things had somehow changed slightly, and she could be sitting there now with Darren Cahill as well as part of the team. I actually got the chance to, at the Australian Open, I sat a couple of seats away from Darren Cahill when Amanda played Naomi Osaka, and it was when she wasn't expected to win. She was actually quite it was when Naomi was near the top of her game. It was early, I think, in the first week that they played each other, and Amanda won it in a third set tiebreak, and you could tell how effective Cahill was, point to point, game to game across the course of the match in terms of being able to settle her and keep her on task. So I just have this in the back of my head of, what might have been, I guess, if things were to, have been able to pan out a little bit more successfully, both for Amanda, but then also, what happens with Yannick with not bringing Darren Cahill onto the team, later in the year. I think she will use use the results from Wimbledon and the US Open in particular as a catalyst, I think, for 2026. I feel like Amanda is maybe the type of player who, we're not going to see her every week at every tournament, and run herself into the ground. But if she can keep playing at this level at the big tournaments, I think she's going to be able to establish herself and start knocking on the door. I think against those top three, she just probably needs to not necessarily win a Grand Slam. I think to make herself part of that group, but maybe start beating that trio a little bit more consistently. So Iga, obviously the US Open was a fantastic win, and then she's got a big opportunity, I think, moving forward, as well as the world number 5 Mira Andreeva. I think the two of them are certainly knocking on the door in a way that no men's players really are with Carlos and Yannick.
One thing I wanted to mention, which they mentioned in the broadcast, was the high praise for Anasimova's backhand, which the comments were it was the best in tennis, men or women, which I think is obviously high praise. But do you feel like that's hyperbole, or where do you sit in view of her backhand?
I don't know if I'd say the best. I think there's a big difference between saying the best and one of the best, or in that field. But maybe I'll sit back and have a think about obviously the best backhands that we have in the game at the moment. I think it's certainly up there, and maybe it's something we put to the viewers if they have their thoughts on who has the best backhand at the moment on the ATP and the WTA tours. But it's certainly been the side that she's made great strides on in terms of improving her consistency and power. And not everyone's able to generate winners off their backhand side as easily as Anisimova has more recently. So it's something that really brought her in and kept her on top against Iga, being able to make the most of that. No one's able to target that as a weakness. But yeah, things are starting to click for her, which is great. And as I said, she's 24 at the moment. She's got many years of high quality tennis ahead of her. So I feel like the only way is up for her.
Drop a comment if you're watching and you know of a backhand you're a fan of, or one you think's better, or who has the best backhand in your eyes. Now that we're on YouTube, drop a comment. I want to talk about Sabalenka's tiebreak record. She went 21-2 in 2025, or that's what she said. So there's more to play. She could obviously have some regression here, but as it sits right now, absolutely insane record. I actually think this is probably the most insane stat and kind of going under talked about because, well, first of all, as a bettor, I never win tie breaks with the player I bet on. But, in general, they are kind of 50-50 propositions, obviously a little bit slanted in terms of the quality of the player. But, I mean, that's just an unreal level of clutch, an unreal level of luck. I mean, I think it's astounding, quite frankly.
Yeah, that's massive. And look, I think to an extent, when you're at the top of the game and you look at the work that, both Arena puts into her game, but the work that her team puts into the game as well, and, the data analytics work that they use, and, everything's pretty, everything's well planned out. The advantage for Sabalenka, and I don't think it's something you'd see, that percentage disparity. It's probably harder to see a little bit on the men's side of things, but I think Sabalenka's serve is obviously in the top range on the women's side. It becomes a massive advantage when you get to a tiebreak and you're looking to try and generate some cheap points. And yeah, I think it's particularly over the last probably 18 to 24 months, her ability to focus and concentrate and perform in those larger moments. I think it all comes to a fore in a tiebreak. And now, you hit that point where it's, if you're playing against her, that now that tiebreak record, and that tiebreak record now becomes part of the pressure, I think, that builds for opponents. If you're standing across from her going, oh, she's won, 21 of the last 23 tiebreaks that she's played, it adds to the situation and the moment that's already generally a big moment because all these players have spent a lot of, they've spent so much energy just getting to a tiebreak, and then they sit there in a tiebreak and go, well, now I have, on record this year, I have probably about a, just over 5% chance of winning this thing. So, it's got to be demoralizing for people at the other end of the court.
I shortchanged her. She's 21-1. I think I said 21-2. So sorry.
Oh, well, even worse.
Sabalenka. Did not mean to sully your record with one more loss. All right, Steve. I thought it'd be fun to have a segment where we can talk about us and our preferences. People can get to know us a little bit better. We can talk about a few of our favorite players. I obviously, with the Matchpoint 9 show, I mainly cover the men's tour. So I only have men's players to talk about. I could throw in a female if I want. I could think of one, but I generally am watching the men's tour for betting purposes. But I will kick it off, and I will say I am a Ben Shelton fan, and something I wanted to bring up when we were talking about the U.S. Open with that rivalry, and things kind of always wrapping up the way we sort of expected. It would be nice to have someone else pushing into that tier with them. And I do think Ben Shelton and Jack Draper, to an extent, I think those are the two guys that could threaten to get in there. I'm tossing Holger Rune out, which we can talk about Rune's dating stuff here in a sec as well. But I was really impressed with Ben Shelton's summer, especially winning Toronto. And as an American, he's our hope. And I tell you what, I get geeked up to watch this kid play. I do. He's definitely appointment TV for me. Doesn't always have the most exciting game. A little bit of a bot, I believe, on the Nothing Major show. Opelka called him a bot, but I think we saw some development this summer that we've been hoping for in terms of the return game and point construction and things like that. And I just always perk up when he's on the slate. So, any thoughts on Shelton before you talk about your favorite player?
Yeah, I think obviously we've seen the glimpses, and when you look at a player like Shelton and the early form that I guess caught the attention of obviously myself, watching from Australia, you saw the performances of getting deep in Grand Slams before he almost kind of made it as a best of 3 player, which isn't, it's kind of breaking the mold a little bit. Normally it's the best of 5 that comes later, but you think of some of those performances in recent years, making deep runs in Australia and then backing it up and going deep the US Open, and you look at it and you go, well, actually he's one of the form players on hard court over best of 5 at a pretty young age. I feel like for you guys, he is to you guys what Nick Kyrgios was, I guess, in a way to Australians, except all of the Shelton, or the majority of the Shelton talk, is about kind of performance on court, and it seems a bit more focused on the sport itself. Whereas Kyrgios, and his coverage over here is probably a little bit more wide ranging and not necessarily always tennis focused. But I think it's very clear. It doesn't take long to watch Shelton and go, well, yes, maybe he is very serve dominated in terms of his results, but you can see all the bits and pieces there. I feel like, this year, particularly late in the year, he's started to construct points, I think, a little bit more than, he was previously. That not everything has to be I've said this with, Denis Shapovalov and a few others as well. Not every winner has to be something that you can post as a highlight on Instagram. Like, there is an art to kind of building and constructing points and turning defense into offense and those sort of things. And I think that's all starting to click for him, and I'm really interested to see where he goes in 2026.
One quick thing before you talk about your fave or one of your faves. I am concerned about the shoulder injury. He's been pretty clean injury-wise so far in his young career. I mean, if we're going to be picking up shoulder injuries left and right moving forward, I'm not saying he's going to, but I'm just saying let's live in a world where that is happening. I mean, we're going to be cooked. It's not great.
It's not a great injury to have.
When your
Probably better
signature
than
is
a wrist.
your serve.
Yes, yeah, that's not the ideal thing to have, but probably maybe a little bit better than a wrist, but still not ideal. It'll be interesting to see, when he does come back, how that's going to look, and how quickly he kind of builds that confidence back with the shoulder. And then although a slightly different injury, look at Grigor Dimitrov as well is another one to keep an eye on. I think coming back from his pec injury, obviously he was someone who got close to Yannick Sinner at Wimbledon, but they're tricky injuries and not things that we really want to see at the top of the game. But I'll jump into, well, I don't necessarily have a favorite player, but I do like the kind of, you get, and maybe it's more so the fact that I like the kind of, not necessarily the underdog or the, maybe the player that doesn't have all the weapons but has to put in 100% into every point to be able to kind of be competitive, and particularly against some of the bigger players. So I like the group of, and I don't really want to group too many players together, but thinking more along the lines of the Davidovich Fokina, Alex de Minaur, the players who are athletic and try and use that to their advantage to kind of bring themselves back into matches. I don't mind watching, as an example, Davidovich Fokina or a de Minaur try and play Ben Shelton and watch them try and kind of get the serve back and try and do things that a lot of other players can't potentially do at that level. So I do like that player type. I'll always have a soft spot for Adrian Manarino. If you were to go back, using the same kind of thought process, I was always a big Gilles Simon fan, because you can sit there and go, right, this is going to be, we're watching tennis, but it also feels like we're almost watching a game of chess to an extent on the court, in terms of what he can do, take pace off, keep it flat, give different looks. I think there's certainly that's the type of thing I enjoyed. I know it wasn't everyone's cup of tea or things that they like to watch, but I liked watching people try and kind of figure things out on the run and figure out what works and what doesn't work, and go, well, worst case scenario, if you're going to beat me, it's going to be over 4 or 5 hours. So let's see if you can come into the deep water with me. So I have more of a favorite player type as opposed to a favorite player.
And that's fair. Those are very entertaining styles and players. Demon, awe-inspiring in terms of his fitness. I mean, there's a reason this guy's won Acapulco twice too. I mean, just last man standing. And then you mentioned Fokina. Guy's just a total character. I mean, they have the Twitter account, Did Foki Fall? His ability to step into a phone booth and come out as Chokina, also extremely entertaining. He's a great character and a fun watch, and he's had a great year, honestly. Like, if there was like first, second, third team, I think Fokina would probably be on like the second team of players this year.
And it's going to be interesting to see how he goes in terms of winning that first ATP tournament. Obviously, we've seen this year he's come within a point multiple times. It's going to, I almost feel like he needs to play, the week before a Grand Slam, and just play maybe in a weaker field and just get that pressure off. Because I think once he kind of breaks through, if he can stay fit, he is someone who can kind of sit. He can certainly sit in the top 10 for an extended period of time if things click and he can find that confidence overall. But just at the moment, you think back to that match with de Minaur a couple of months ago, so close but yet so far. You just hope he doesn't go down the Julian Benneteau kind of path of just not being able to get through at that ATP level.
We mentioned Holger Rune. Let's talk about him for a second. I mean, just first of all, he's having a not great year, and then just getting drugged this week for his horrible DM game. And then not only like was it embarrassing just to have that like on social media, but then like Daily Mail just completely bodied him with a classic Daily Mail headline about his desperate attempts at dating. And oh man, Holger, you are you're down bad right now.
I mean, I think the bit that I find funny about this is not necessarily funny, but it's almost frustrating as a tennis watcher is if only Holger had this, dogged determination on the court, and he'd be in the top three.
Yeah,
Like,
he needs to have the tennis court equivalent of 10 unanswered DMs.
yeah, just pretend you've got an unanswered DM at the other end of the court. Try and impress the person who hasn't responded to you the last 10 times. Like, I mean, we've had Kalinskaya this week. We've had Kudermetova last month. I do wonder, it's one of those ones, is he just going to lean into it a little bit more, and we're going to find out that, he's had a go at, getting into the DMs of, another top player in the next month or two. It's, or things are going to unravel and he's going to end up on his own dating reality show. It'll just be Holger standing up there, maybe with his mum off to the side.
I am curious how the dating show that the US Open did as part of their social media turned out. And I know Morgan Riddle had her hand in that, which kudos to her for shaping that. And but yeah, I thought that was an interesting platform. I just wonder how successful it was. I know that the Wimbledon social media team got a lot of love for how they handled their socials, which I thought was pretty cool as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see I haven't heard anything about that, or even who won, or no real breakout characters from the because you know how sometimes like in reality shows those characters kind of break out.
And maybe with Holger it's not an in-person reality dating show. Maybe someone just hands him a phone with 20 DM conversations that all start with someone else actually saying hi and responding to him, and seeing where that unfolds over the course of a week or a month or a night.
I mean, I guess you have to say something, but I did feel like the cultural difference card was pretty weak as an excuse. If I'm being honest, he could have just said like, "Yeah, I shot my shot. Whoops."
I mean, that was with Kalinskaya, but then you go to Kudermetova. It takes one very quick look to realize that she's also married. Like
that's true.
It's there's to be it'd be nice to know. Is it going to, are we going to see kind of 3, 4, 5 more players kind of come out and, almost like a solidarity against Holger's DM tendencies? But as I said, like, redirect the focus onto the court. We saw what Holger can do against the top player. We saw him push Jannik Sinner to the limit in Melbourne. We've seen him beat, top players and play some really great tennis. Just need a bit of consistency on the court instead of consistently finding his way into people's DMs off the court.
That actually might have been a cultural difference. Talking to Kudermetova. All right, Steve. Well, I feel like this is going pretty well. I want to skip ahead and have our last segment be the tournaments we're looking forward to this fall. We have a fair amount of calendar left, not an overwhelming amount of tournaments, but some fun sites along the way. And so I thought it'd be interesting to talk about things we're looking forward to, any classic memories. I want to start off with my background, Hangzhou, a relatively new site, a small 250, and they have these really beautiful stadiums. You can kind of see it behind me here. They're like flower shaped and completely empty.
But they look good.
Like it's just like such a jarring visual to see. Also, I believe this is like a 10 million person city. It's a pretty big city, and yeah, it's like these gorgeous exterior shots. You see this like fast commotion of a metropolitan, and then crickets inside. So I'm not necessarily looking forward to that, but I do find that a funny visual on the horizon coming up.
Yeah, I think, yes, obviously it would be nice if there were a few more people there, but obviously they're getting enough out of the rights and everything else that kind of comes with with an empty stadium for those kind of tournaments. I mean, I really like this part of the tournament. I mean, not tournament, like of the tournament season in terms of, yes, the Grand Slams are done. You alluded to before, maybe don't we see, Sinner and Alcaraz, as often as we perhaps would expect, were this to be earlier in the season. So it just brings an opportunity, I think, for a lot of other players to kind of take that step up. I'd use probably as an example for this year, you think of, we sit here and go, oh, Sinner, Alcaraz on the men's side. But, we took Sinner out for the first couple of months, that kind of February, March, April. And, look what happened at Indian Wells and look what happened in Miami. Look at Menchik, breaking through. So I'm curious to see if there's going to be one of those players kind of make that breakthrough. And it might not be to, make their way to world number 3, but it's, who can break their way into the top 10. Who can put together a solid, tournament at one of the ATP 500s leading in what have we got? We've got Beijing and Tokyo, and then who's going to be able to maybe take a Masters 1000 in Shanghai. Like I think that whole kind of pocket of the year, someone can put together a pretty strong week there. You're looking at over 1,000 points across the two, and that's a pretty big chunk of ranking points to get you, pretty well on your way to being seeded at Grand Slams and those sort of things. So I'm more interested to see who can kind of take that step. And look, I think I always like the switch back to that kind of European indoor late in the year, kind of coming into then Paris and finishing the year off. So I don't have probably a favorite tournament. I haven't got a stadium with flowers in the background to be able to allude you to. But the other thing for me is, Australian Open tickets go on sale next week. So, using my background as an example, it's not going to be long until action's going to be out on this court again.
No, it's actually shorter than the AO to French Open, I believe. You mentioned Menchik. I think he is a candidate to resurface here to do something. I don't know, how committed he is to this part of the calendar, but I do feel like the U.S. Open ball that they've been using was not beneficial to his game. I mean, the guy couldn't land a first serve. Now we're going to the quicker course of Asia. The balls are going to be completely different. I could see him actually getting some first serves in again and having some success in the weeks ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he is one of those players that I'm kind of talking about. You look at players through that kind of, range of, we've got Menchik, who's 17 at the moment, Lehechka, or, it's someone like an Andrei Rublev who, has had a very up and down year, but, can start to kind of reestablish themselves back towards, the back end of the year, maybe with some of the weaker tournament fields in some spots and use it as a springboard to, head to Australia and put together a solid block there. You can do a lot of good, or you can do a lot of damage to your overall ranking between now and the end of January. So it's going to be interesting to see, if we look at the top 20 now and we look at the top 20 at the end of January, how much of a shift there has been through the top of the men's and the women's.
Yeah, let me bring up some players here in the rankings. Obviously, Draper shut it down for the rest of the year. Khachanov is someone that typically does well, and he doesn't necessarily need to do well. Obviously, he's had some success finally back up in the top 10, actually.
Felix is probably one that probably fits that bill of, does he use the confidence from the US Open and use that as a springboard for later in the year to be able to kind of make some, semi-finals or finals in these kind of bigger hardcourt tournaments. We know then past, the Asian swing, things move back to that, indoor hardcourt, which has certainly been a strength of his in years gone by. He's won tournament after tournament. Some years, the indoor hard. So, is he going to be able to kind of move his way from 13 in the world back into the top 10? There's a few kind of interesting stories there.
Ugo Humbert is a player that desperately needs something.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. He's probably another great example that, all we're hearing more and more at the moment is how long the tennis season is and how exhausted some of the players get. And Humbert, he had injury through that kind of clay season. Didn't play anywhere near as much as he probably wanted to. If he can get his body right and he is fresher than, the majority of other players in that kind of ranking range, these are the type of players that are really interesting to watch to see if they can, it doesn't have to be winning these tournaments. It's just making runs to quarters and semis and, building a little bit of momentum.
Exactly. I'm interested to see Luciano Darderi and what he can do. He's up in the top 30 now. He's going to be playing in a lot more main draws, and he doesn't have a lot of hardcourt data, but I think his game can translate. He's a player I want to watch coming up, see how he does. Go ahead.
We'll see a lot of interesting things, I think, from him. I don't think he's going to make the list from anyone in the comments if we're talking about the best backhand on tour. But I think we'll it's certainly be interesting to see how much he can kind of produce on the hard court. Obviously given the majority of his points do come from the clay.
Put a comment for any players you're excited to watch this fall that could maybe pop out here. I'm looking further down the list. Obviously, you talk about guys that could build off momentum and conditions that suit him. Ben Bonzi, another Frenchman. I would think he's looking to press it here. Zizou Bergs finally playing well again. Another player that could stand to take advantage of some non-committal from bigger players.
Now, I'm obviously a little bit biased as an Australian, but I may as well start it here in this first show. Is I want to start the push for Bernard Tomic to get an Australian Open wildcard.
He's been playing
not
okay.
Not a relationship that he's had. It hasn't been a strong relationship over the years between Bernard and Tennis Australia, but I think the body of form or the amount of tennis he's been able to play over the last kind of 18 months in particular, he's sitting around that kind of 170 mark at the moment in the rankings, making fairly consistently quarters and semis, and had a couple of ATP Tour level wins on the grass a couple of months ago. I think I look at his name and I look at what's there. It would be great to see him at least get some sort of reward for consistency and also just staying out of the news for the most part more recently. So that's going to be one of my little side quests, I think, over the next couple of months is Tomic AO wildcard watch.
Steve, I mentioned Hernachanov, who is ranked 10th. He's a top 10 player. That is mind-blowing to me and pretty damning for the state of the men's game. This guy's sitting at a 30 and 19 on the season. He's a top 10 player.
You just gotta win at the right time.
I guess so. I mean, this guy did nothing for almost the entire calendar until like the last 6 weeks.
Yeah, and then he came within a tiebreak of beating Ben Shelton in a Masters 1000. He'd be even higher. It's I think Karen over the years has kind of shown the record overall, across the whole year, if you look at pure win-loss, might not always look amazing, but if you can win the right ones, you can make your way to kind of quarters and, quarters of Grand Slams and, semis of some of the bigger tournaments along the way, or, win a medal at the Olympics. It's, he's shown that he can be around and be a tough out in some of those bigger tournaments.
Speaking of tournaments, I want to talk about my other two faves coming up. Stockholm, incredible sweaters in the crowd, Steve. I mean, the sweater game indoors at Stockholm, just sensational. And then the other one is Paris, because that atmosphere is actually insane. Like, for being the last stop on the tour, or one of the last stops, like, people go nuts, especially for a home countryman. I mean, I joked the other day about when Gaston had that run a few years ago. I mean, people were getting pregnant. There's like baby Hugos out there because of the frenzy that it was sending people into in that tournament. There's a lot of fun coming up still, lest we think the U.S. Open is the end of the season.
It's and I think just talking about Stockholm and some of those indoor hardcore tournaments. I love sitting there. So for me, it's late at night or overnight, and you're watching a stream of a match on a you can't say outside court, but one of the lesser courts of an indoor tournament, and it's just the players, a handful of spectators, crammed in. You get the echo of the low roof, and all that's between them and another court is a curtain and something, maybe a little bit of netting at the back of the court. And you can see, these players are grinding for, 250, 500 ranking points, just like, some of the larger tournaments with the big stadiums, as you said, that are empty in Asia. I think it's, you get to see the real, the spectators who are, there and love the sport and love being up close. The things you don't normally get at some of those kind of bigger tournaments, it's harder to kind of feel like you're in amongst it in the same way as, particularly some of the indoor courts and indoor tournaments, particularly through Europe in the back end.
Also, welcome to the calendar, Athens, Greece. Little 250 post Paris.
And obviously, Stefanos playing some inspired tennis at the moment. It would be.
That's a choice word.
And well, this is the tricky thing for him, because you sit there and you look at it, and he's obviously still struggling. I think physically, there's obviously been a lot going on and off the court for Stefanos, and I'd imagine that there is a fair amount of pressure maybe on him to partake in this tournament as well. So look, we saw at the start of the year what incredible tennis he can play at times. New racket, wins a tournament, and then things have kind of unraveled both on and off the court. It'll be interesting to see if he can kind of recapture, the form that we saw. Because at his best, you said, we were talking before about the big three of years gone by. He was the one knocking on the door. He was 2 sets to love up on, Novak in a Grand Slam final. He had opportunities and just couldn't quite take advantage of them in the same way that Medvedev and team, for example, were able to take it. So hopefully there's not too much, mental scarring from kind of missed opportunities, and we can see him kind of make his way back up towards the top 10 over the next 12 to 18 months.
Well, his only splash was indoors this year, so maybe not totally drawing dead in Greece. All right, Steve. Well, this was fun. I think a good intro to the show. Some good general discussion. We're going to have more graphics and things like that as we go along, but we wanted to finally bite the bullet, get a show out there, get us going, get the kindling for the fire that will be the All Surface show. Steve, any last thoughts?
I was going to say, if you have enjoyed any part of it, feel free to Holger Rune and slide into our DMs. Let us know what you thought. We're well and truly open to constructive criticism, and unlike the people who Holger has been trying to contact, we will get back to you.
Well, that would be amazing if DMing becomes just known as Holger Rune.
Yeah.
His name becomes a verb.
We'll turn it into a verb.
There you go. Great moment to finish on. Until next time, see everyone on the court.